particular in this matchup.
Very good, and we are going straight into our first game here. INER is going to be on the zoo. Thijs with his Reno Warlock, and Brian, how does this matchup usually fall? What are the key cards? What are both decks looking to do?
Well, one of the key cards is sitting in Thijs' hand, Reno Jackson himself. This is a matchup that prior to Standard tended to be pretty significantly, I think, in the advantage of the Reno Warlock player, simply because they had so many strong tools fighting for the board, gaining health back. Since Antique Healbot left the format, since there just aren't quite as many ways for the Warlock, or rather the Control Warlock, they're both Warlocks in this instance, to claw back into the game. It's made the deck lean a lot more heavily on Reno Jackson, which makes the fact that it's in Thijs' opening hand very important.
Yeah, I think definitely the board clears also have to come into effect as well, though, right? Because you cannot just heal yourself back up to 30 against Zoo and hope that's going to be good enough if they still have 10 power on board the following turn. It's just not going to get you across the line. And one of the things that can make those board clears more effective from the other side is that Zoo has lost a lot of cards as well. They've lost most of their efficient death rattles, the Haunted Creepers, the Nerubian Eggs, etc. Yeah,
and while Thijs has that Reno Jackson in his opening hand, he mulliganed the rest, and the cards that replaced it just are not very good. Ragnaros and Alexstrasza are very powerful cards, but they're very expensive cards, and this is a matchup that can go very quickly.
Yeah, Thijs would have been looking for an opening similar to what he got against Loyan on his Reno Lock game, where he had the Doomsayer into Imp Gang Boss curve. Does pick up the Doomsayer now, and I was just about to make the point that INER missing his 2-drop is a massive deal as well, because obviously he's the one looking to play for pressure in this matchup, and the fact that he's missed his 2-drop now gives that Doomsayer a very realistic chance of going off, whereas if there was a Dark Peddler or a Knife Juggler down alongside this Flame Imp now, he'd have a much more realistic chance of dealing with it.
Yeah, it's a very, very big deal. Now, the only real way for INER to remove that is either a Power Overwhelming or a Soulfire. He has both of those in his hand, but that ends up costing him a fairly significant amount of resources here. He's going to go ahead and use the Soulfire, loses Defender of Argus, but this is very important because he is able to maintain his pressure on the board.
Right, yeah, I think definitely worth the loss of some burst damage and the loss of a card from your hand. And actually, although Argus is such a power card in the deck, since that was the card he had 2 of, it may have been his best discard just to maintain the variety of options in his hand.
And the Twilight Drake from Thijs, pretty valuable here. The most important thing for your minions in the early game against Zoo is their health.
Yeah.
Because Zoo's power lies in its ability to effectively trade into opposing minions with buffs. Unfortunately for Thijs, the Power Overwhelming is enough to take out the Drake despite it having so much health.
Yeah, so board dominance continuing for INER for now, but Thijs, after that very, very awkward-looking opening hand, has been drawing some good options that's at least keeping him on the board here. Spellbreaker and Imp Gang Boss, both relatively appropriate. Spellbreaker would be the better on-curve play. You can get rid of the annoying threat of the Imp Gang Boss spawning too many tokens, but is the Imp Gang Boss equally appealing in this situation?
I think that the Spellbreaker definitely has some appeal. The Imp Gang Boss has a bit higher health, and right here, if he does play Spellbreaker, the threat of Defender of Argus or a Abusive Sergeant are both pretty scary. He has seen one Defender go down to the Soulfire, so he may be thinking it's not that likely he has another one, but unfortunately for Thijs, this is going to be a pretty bad situation for him because the Defender of Argus will allow INER to remove his board with little effort.
Certainly will. He's going to go ahead and place the Argus on the 1-3 and actually not take the value trade, mitigating some AoE effects, Mortal Coil as well. He's just going to keep his powerful minions on the board. As you mentioned, the health on your targets on board, very important in this matchup. But yeah, little psychological tricks that can sometimes get you into trouble in Hearthstone. It's perfectly valid reasoning to say, I've just seen one Defender of Argus get discarded, I'm not going to play around the second one. Just so happens that sometimes they do have the second one sat in hand and you get punished for it.
And this is actually a pretty good just on-curve Cult Apothecary for Thijs, brings him back up to 27. The Cult Apothecary is a 4-4. That body is quite valuable against the board that INER has available to him.
Yeah, and the first real whiff of a turn from INER here, didn't really pick up any power options, does have Power Overwhelming in his hand to try and create a better trade with this 4-4, but it's not an attractive looking proposition to use a Power Overwhelming on any of these minions. Didn't really pick up any really big proactive threats as well, just a couple of 1-drops.
It's definitely a power option. It's literally an option with power in the name.
All right, Kibler, you win this one. But yeah, a low impact turn, let's put it that way. No Darkshire Councilman, no more big threats coming down on this turn. He is still, maintaining his dominance of the board, so he's still looking in good shape. And there aren't any crucial AoEs in Thijs' hand right now. But INER, of course, will be considering the various implications of what does a Shadow Flame do to my board right now? What does a Hellfire do to my board right now? So he has to work out how to mitigate all those potential options as best he can.
If he does decide to, he's going to go ahead and just attack 2 of his minions in, wants to save that power overwhelming potentially for burst damage or to fight through a larger minion on a later turn.
Yeah, so Thijs, this is the situation you get into now with Reno Lock, where you're playing a tempo-focused matchup. You're playing against a deck where they're just trying to out-tempo you as hard as they can, so your temptation is to match that. So the highest tempo play you can make right now is just to play Brand Bronze Beard and Imgang Boss, assuming you're not just going to slam Reno. But there's the question of, do I win the game with this hand that I have right now? Do I need to tap and pick up more options? Having now seen that Twisting Nether come out, I'm kind of okay with this line of just playing the double 3-drops and competing with the board, but with no AoE in sight, I think the temptation to tap there might have been a lot higher. Yeah,
he definitely needs to find some sort of answer to what INER is doing here. Speaking of finding answers, INER finds a Soulfire or a Mortal Coil. The Mortal Coil gives him the ability, well, he was going to want to attack the 3-5 into Bran and then Mortal Coil, but now the Juggler means that Mortal Coil is no longer terribly valuable in that particular exchange. He could attack his 1-power guys into Bran to use the Mortal Coil in order to draw a card. That ends up being a little less overall efficient for, I think, what he wants to do, because it leaves him without a Death Rattle minion in play.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that Mortal Coil was a strong pick in 2 out of 3 worlds, but the world where the Knife Juggler snipes down the Bran has got him into a little bit of trouble. He is going to go with your play here, Kibler. Now he's... Oh, wow! That Juggler!
Oh, the Juggler, he really wanted Bran dead.
Wow.
And I think Thijs knows, based on that attack sequence, that the card that INER selected was Mortal Coil.
Right.
He's really sort of telegraphed the fact that this is what I'm trying to do with my turn. Right. And, particularly the time that he took, the hesitation after the selection, really telegraphed that card in his hand. So a bit of valuable information for Thijs.
What's particularly crazy about that whole sequence of events is that the Mortal Coil there seems like such a safe pick, because if any knife hits the Imgang boss, for example, there's a Mortal Coil target on the board then, because an Imp gets spawned. So that specific interaction with it hitting the Bran twice specifically was the only thing that denied his coil that turn.
And I wonder if the sequencing of INER's particular attacks, he attacked with the Voidwalker first. He could have attacked with the minion with Death Rattle first.
Very true.
And he would have known where the knife would have been thrown. So it's a very minor thing, but ultimately significantly impacted the way the turn played out.
Yeah, so now suddenly that power overwhelming is looking a lot more rosy, but he's going to go ahead and coil first to pick up his card. His hand is still lacking in threats a little bit. That Councilman changes that very, very quickly, though. Darkshire Councilman, one of the biggest threats in the Zoo deck these days. 5-5 into 3-5 through the use of power overwhelming, and he's just going to continue to play for the board here. This is interesting because he's seen no Hellfire, no Shadow Flame being used for several turns now. So he might just be able to put his opponent on a Twisting Nether as the only potential AoE in hand, in which case, trading with the Imgang boss doesn't really achieve anything.
And that Demon Wrath is a huge draw for Thijs, because he has the opportunity to use Twisting Nether to clear the board right now, and then the Demon Wrath gives him an answer to the follow-up Forbidden Ritual that's waiting in INER's hand.
Right. Yeah, I mean, not too much debate about this turn. Thijs is going to go ahead and remove this board with the power of Twisting Nether. We're going to get a life tap from INER, which I like. He's not going 100% all in on the Forbidden Ritual. He's in fact not even playing one of his cards.
Thijs even has the perfect curve of Demon Wrath into Reno.
Right.
Or Sylvanas, which he also just drew. I think Reno Jackson here may be something that he might consider, just because he is playing against a deck that has significant amount of burst damage. He has seen Power Overwhelming. He's seen Soulfire. But I think that there's a lot of incentive to ensure that you're not priced into playing Reno on a future turn. A lot of players will think that, okay, I want to get the maximum value out of my Reno Jackson, so I'm going to wait until I'm lower. But that can sometimes lead to being in a very awkward situation where your mana usage isn't optimal in a later turn, because you feel like you have to play Reno to stay alive.
Right, particularly because at a high level, that's something your opponent will be trying to do, right?
Exactly.
They will try and create a situation where playing Reno Jackson is awkward for you because of the board they create. So if you have the freedom to do it and it's a significant heal, as that was for Thijs, it's usually a solid plan to just go ahead and do it. But still, now that he's chewed through most of those cards that he drew in the mid-game, we're kind of back to that sort of opening hand-looking scenario where most of his cards are fairly awkward against the deck he's up against right now.
They are fairly awkward, but they're also fairly powerful.
Yeah.
You know, even though Ragnaros is not the best card against Zoo, it's still Ragnaros. It's still a card that they need to deal with, or just the threat of it killing one of their minions or just sending giant fireballs to their face is very, very real.
Yeah, I mean, the Zoo has tapped and played Flame Imp, etc., all the way down to 12 life so far. So
Alex Strauss in your face? It's not even good.
Right, but with the 4 damage Reno on the board already, with the Soulfire in hand, he has a potential Ragnaros that can hit face at some point as well. Like, the Zoo cannot just play all out for offense here. So yeah, I like this Rag coming down right now, because this Ragnaros, if it ever manages to connect with face, threatens to end the game.
Going to Soulfire the dog.
I like this.
And is he going to attack the face with Reno?
Yeah,
he's going ahead. If Ragnaros hits face, the game's over. If Ragnaros hits a minion, well, that's really bad for you too.
Yep. These are situations that you can often create with Ragnaros, where it's either I win or I win. You know, you either get a fantastic trade on the board with Ragnaros' Fireball, or you just get lethal. They're usually superior to just, you know, playing the safe version on the board. But Mortal Coil is going to allow the removal of Rag. But
that's that Mortal Coil that he picked up a bunch of turns ago, wanting to use it immediately. Finally, it kills a Ragnaros, and he draws another Mortal Coil off of it.
Yes, he does. So yeah, I mean, this is just really, really awkward. No way to even answer the Reno on board. So power overwhelming draw. 4+4 where I come from, Brian, makes 8, and that means Tice is going to go up 1-0 in the grand finals here. INER has some fighting back to do, and the Reno Lock able to overcome the Zoo.
Yeah, and that's a big matchup win there for Tice. I think the Warlock deck was one of the matchups that the Freeze Mage was potentially going to be able to match up quite well against.
Right.
I actually had it sort of confused in my head when I was sitting at the analyst desk. I was thinking that Tice was actually playing Zoo, but the Reno Lock deck I think is similarly vulnerable these days because of the lack of healing in that deck.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's definitely a key win, because that can make it much more difficult for INER to really pick up that important win with this Freeze Mage.
Yeah, it seems weird to say that the weakness of the Reno Lock deck is a lack of healing, right? But in the Freeze Mage matchup, you know, they have 54 plus damage in their deck, so that one Reno doesn't get the job done, and the loss of Heal Bot has hurt them significantly. We haven't really talked about the bans just yet. INER has had his Shaman banned out, where Tice has lost his Warrior. I don't think it's a great surprise to see that Face Shaman going down from INER's side. I think that was looking pretty powerful against Tice's lineup, but what do you think of the Warrior ban?
We've actually, I believe, seen INER ban Warrior in every matchup so far, and I think that given the fact that he is playing Freeze Mage, it's generally a class that you don't want to go against really any version of when you're playing that Freeze Mage deck. Similarly, I think the Warrior matches up fairly well, the mid-range Tempo Warrior matches up fairly well against most of his lineup in general, so I definitely think that that's the ban he was looking for when constructing his lineup. Right,
I was backstage with some of the players while the admins were asking for the bans at the start of the day for the semi-finals, and before the admin even got anywhere close to INER knew what the question was and just said Warrior again all day, every day, 24/7.
Actually, I believe last night we were talking a little bit with INER, and he was just saying, yeah, bad Warrior every time.
So here we go. We're going to have the Shaman from Tice. This is an aggressive Shaman. It just has these extra mid-rangey cards like Tuskar Totemic and Thing from Below thrown in there. It's going to be the Shaman up against the Zoo from INER, and Tice does have that Coin Totem Golem opening, but power overwhelming on a Death Rattle minion, followed up by a Flame Imp, picks apart that opening very, very effectively.
That's the perfect answer for INER here, and this is really the perfect matchup for INER as well. The aggressive Warlock deck typically matches up extremely well against the aggressive Shaman deck because they are so much more effective at keeping early minions on board. The aggressive Shaman deck has better tools to close out games, like Doomhammer and Lava Burst, but those aren't necessarily efficient at fighting for the game, for the board early, which is really what the games can often come down to when it's minion deck versus minion deck.
INER just going to go ahead for the 3 1/1s here. Had the option to play Voidwalker and 2 1/1s, but with nothing on the board to, you know, protect these tokens from the Voidwalker, didn't really seem to have much use, and he'll just be looking to leverage one of these tokens with the Dark Iron Dwarf on the following turn to trade up. And this Tuskar Totemic is looking like a pretty solid target, but there is Totem Golem number 2 of Proceedings.
That was huge. We see the little thumbs up from INER there. He's like, oh, okay. But despite Tice getting the best possible result from his Tuskar Totemic, he's still in trouble. He's still just got his board entirely cleared. He's facing down a 4-4, and this is where the Zudek's strength really lies. The ability to use these pumps, many of which come in the form of minions. But this is also where the strength of the specific version of Shaman that Thijs is playing lies. The 5-5, the thing from below that he's able to play here, thanks to having summoned those totems, has suddenly really shut down INER's offense.
Yeah, I mean, Zoo is the deck that, plays numerous buffs, so if you're playing another board control-based flooding deck against them, you normally get outmatched because they have too many Direwolves and Power Overwhelmings and Abusive Sergeants to deal with you. But this thing from below right here is one of the cards in this deck that can really just change the maths on that and just say, I'm putting a huge 5-5 down for way too little mana than you're able to deal with, especially with one Power Overwhelming already gone from the deck. And looks like INER is going to try and take the Juggle here. Juggler plus 1 drop, which will enable a trade 50% of the time. So this is a big deal in terms of who gets to dictate the initiative of the attacks here, and he does unfortunately miss out.
And that can also be a pretty big swing here. Thijs has that Lava Burst in his hand, which, as I mentioned earlier, generally pretty inefficient in these mid-range minion battles. However, or rather inefficient in the aggressive minion battles. However, it's excellent at dealing with mid-range minions like that Dark Iron Dwarf. He's able to potentially trade his Lava Burst, get that Dwarf off the board, and suddenly his thing from below is much bigger than anything else in play.
Yeah, so he has the opportunity here. He can take a full board clear with the Lightning Bolt and the Lava Burst. He can develop a Squire alongside that. That will mean he only has 3 mana next turn to answer what Zoo will have to offer, but a 3 mana turn next turn with Finley and Flametongue Totem with an Argent Squire already on the board is looking like it still could be potentially very powerful.
Yeah, and that is a huge swing in not only this game, but in this matchup. This is a place where INER really needed to find a win. With his Zudek. He does find a Soulfire, however, and that will allow him to potentially answer this thing from below. So Thijs is not out of the woods in this matchup just yet.
He's not, and he holds on to the Councilman over the Abusive Sergeant. Abusive Sergeant is honestly one of the very best cards in this matchup. So don't get carried away thinking, okay, he kept the best card in his hand. Abusive Sergeant definitely has a lot of usage, but Darkshire Councilman as a power play is fantastic as well. But this is where that Flametongue Totem turn does come into effect. With the Flametongue on the board, it looks like he's going to go ahead and favor Argent Squire number 2 over Finley. That does make sense to me. He's not going to use his hero power until next turn anyway, where he will likely have the mana to play Finley and do it immediately. And the Divine Shield value trading up with a Flametongue actually, seems like it could create some favorable trades in the future.
And that's a big draw from INER there. The Forbidden Ritual allows him to play Darkshire Councilman, play Forbidden Ritual, not only get a huge buffed Councilman on board, but also get a very wide board that's very difficult for Thijs to trade into, even with his Flametongue Totem on board. It's important to note, many players include a Elemental Destruction or Lightning Storm in some of their Shaman decks. Thijs does not. Thijs has no way to clear this board.
He does not, but he does have a way to at least clear that ever-growing threat of the Councilman. That second Flametongue is possibly the only thing in his deck that could do it efficiently. He's going to go ahead and Totem before playing Finley here, which might seem obvious, but there is a thought not to do it because sometimes you pick up the Warlock hero power, which means that you have more mana available to you for a card that you draw if you don't Totem first.
And this is an interesting decision. Fire Blast versus Life Tap. I think he does need to go with the Life Tap, just because Fire Blast only allows him to sort of incrementally remove these small things from the board, and he's totally out of resources on this.
Yeah, I mean, he can't pay 2 mana a turn to kill a 1/1 each turn. That's not a line that's going to win you the game, right?
I feel like he picks the Life Tap. He really needs to find higher impact cards like Doomhammer, which he does. And INER with the well played as Thijs gets exactly what he was looking for. And now INER does have a very good turn here potentially. Oh, a 0 cost 8/8 in the Sea Giant is huge.
All right, so hopefully INER doesn't just go ahead and Mortal Coil that 5/1 right in the middle first. That seems like a bit of a potential mistake. So trading out the Flametongue Totems here first seems sensible, then using the Mortal Coil to finish something else off. He only has 5 power in attacks from these 1/1s, so without using the Mortal Coil on a Flametongue Totem, he couldn't even get rid of the buffs on the board.
Yeah, he could choose to just remove both Flametongue Totems this turn, using the 5 power he has and the Mortal Coil. That would leave Thijs with 3 minions, but it would cause him not to actually lose any power on board. He does choose to leave the totem up, however. Finds Power Overwhelming. He could use that to clear off the totem as well. Or he's going to take down Finley and leave just the totem in play.
Yeah, it looks like he's just going to isolate the totem. So the ordering there, you know, he wanted to use the Mortal Coil early in his turn while he still had attacks remaining. So if he picked up, say, a Direwolf Alpha, an Abusive Sergeant, or a Power Overwhelming that we saw, he then had more options to be able to trade for the board more effectively. But suddenly, that 8-8, obviously a 0-mana 8-8 is a massive draw, but with that Doomhammer in hand from Thijs, it's a particularly huge draw because it now means Thijs can't create a world where he wins a race by just going face because he has this 8-8 clock on the board. So.
And people, people talk about the 4-mana 7/7 that Thijs just picked up in his hand. It's actually totally outclassed here. He's going to be able to get that down, I imagine, in order to contest the Sea Giant somehow. But it will basically end up. The Sea Giant will basically end up being able to clear it off the board. I think he's debating the Doomhammer versus the Flame Breathe Faceless here. He could use the Doomhammer to either go face or remove the 2 minions. And yeah, this puts INER in a situation where he has just the 8-8 and is going to have to choose exactly how he wants to use it, whether he sends it face. This lets Thijs potentially find Feral Spirits, which can absorb damage over time fairly readily.
Oh boy.
But Defender of Argus makes that 8-8 a lot scarier.
Yeah, it certainly does. I think what Thijs was trying to set up that turn, you know, or would have loved to have set up that turn anyway, was a situation where the Sea Giant had to choose between killing the 7/7 or the Flame Tongue Totem, where there wasn't enough damage to deal with both. He couldn't do that, so he just went with the board control of the Doomhammer. But that Argus coming down may just crush his hopes and dreams. Does have a bit of a defensive play here with the Feral Spirits that can at least let him see another draw, but it's hard to imagine a world where he digs himself out of this through that 9-9. I don't believe there's an Earthshock in his deck either, from what I've seen.
Well, right now, the Sea Giant can currently only take out one of these wolves. The 7/7 can kill the Sea Giant after the fact, and he still does have Doomhammer in play.
Sure. Have we seen Rockbiters from Thijs yet? He used one early to kill a Flame Imp, I believe, after that Power Overwhelming play in the early exchanges. So he only has one left in his deck, if I've remembered correctly. So has also, of course, used that Lightning Bolt and Lava Burst in the same turn. So a lot of his direct damage has already been pulled out of the deck.
He's pretty far behind here, does not have all that much life to work with. He has Life Tap, but it's a lot better when you are not under nearly as much pressure as Thijs is right here. Life Tap will find him. Doomhammer's a great card, but not when you're this far behind and not when you already have Doomhammer in play.
Yeah, I mean, Thijs is going to consider his options here. He's just going to go face. I think this ends up being his out. Is 13 really relevant, though? I think it is. There's still one Lightning Bolt left in the deck, so I think going face increases your out significantly here. You can basically, you're hoping to chain draw Rockbiter into something, and sending this 2 extra damage face gives you that something to be Lightning Bolt and not just Lava Burst.
Well, if you go face as well, you put your opponent dead to just Rockbiter if he doesn't clear your Totem Golem.
Sure.
And I think that attacking the minion, you're going to take damage from the minion attacking your face next turn regardless.
Right.
He does choose to clear the Peddler, so I'm curious exactly what he's playing around in this instance.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but...
no matter what he was playing around, nothing could help him survive. Leroy Jenkins, who comes down and takes game number 2, tying up the series for INER.
Yeah, now feel great for INER, getting himself on the board. I think, he's up against the Titan in Thijs here, so I think, it's hard to not consider yourself the underdog, even though maybe from a skill perspective, he might consider himself on par with Thijs. Thijs has all the experience in the world. He's the one that everyone is looking to win this series.
And we did see the inexperience playing on stage kind of rattle INER on the first day. He made a slight misstep in sequencing, and it visibly impacted his confidence. He was playing, looking shaky, playing maybe a little bit shaky, but he's come back today and really put on a performance that has shown he's probably gotten over those nerves, but he hasn't been in the grand finals before.
He hasn't, as they both survey that potential trophy that could be their prize for winning all of this. They're both deep in thought about their queue for the next game. 1 game apiece. So the decks that have picked up a victory are the Zoo for INER and the... Wait, what did Thijs win game 1 with? I've already forgotten.
Thijs won the first
with
game
the Reno
with
lock,
his
right?
Reno lock,
Yeah,
yes.
so still quite a few options remaining. wondering if we might see the mid-range Hunter from Thijs come out at this point. You did predict it to be a potential power deck in this lineup.
Yeah, I think the Hunter deck is pretty strong, in particular now with the Warlock gone.
Yes,
I actually think the Warlock was the weakest matchup for the mid-range Hunter deck in all of INER's lineup, because Thijs is playing a very anti-control version of Hunter. He has the Camel. He has no copies of Unleash the Hounds, so that's a build of Hunter that can struggle very much against Zoo.
Yeah.
Well, that's gone. So all that's left for INER are these combo control decks like Freeze Mage and Rogue, and then his mid-range Warrior deck against which Desert Camel is an excellent card because there's no 1-drops.
Yeah, I mean, I had the pleasure of discussing the strategy of this deck with Life Coach quite extensively, who plays a very similar list, is a practice partner of Thijs, of course, and he said basically, you're bringing this deck into the tournament, you most of the time are going to be banning Shaman, and then the only deck you're left exposed to is Zoo. So yeah, with the Zoo gone, having picked up a victory for INER, it makes a ton of sense for Thijs to lead out with this deck here. He's up against the Tempo Warrior from INER.
And this is a matchup where it is very much a tempo matchup. As the Tempo Warrior
is
name,
it now,
as much as I might fight
is
against
it
that name, it's still a mid-range deck.
Okay.
But the importance in a matchup like this one really is tempo, because this is a matchup where one player can very easily get ahead significantly in the early game, and that can cause big problems because neither deck really plays terribly well from behind.
Yeah, looking at this opening hand from Thijs, the one thing he will be thinking right now is that he hopes that injured Valdir stays in his deck now, because he's drawn both Fiery Bats, so if he gets a Camel before a Valdir now, that Camel is a very, very huge power play. But going down the line here, he has the option of coin 2 into 2, or he can go for coin double 1s right now, or he can just play a 1-drop and maintain his coin. This is one of the most flexible openings you can have for a tempo-based deck, is the double 1, double 2 opening hand with the coin.
I like the emote from INER here. The laugh. He's clearly showing that he's loosened up a bit since his early stress on day one. Thijs, though, clearly a playtest partner of Life Coach, as the rope is burning on turn 1. This is, though, admittedly a very difficult first turn. He has a lot of options. He could choose to save the coin. He's going to go ahead and just play a King's Elec here.
Well, yeah,
he actually coined that. I was like, wait, maybe that's not what I'm going to do. And, well, there's the injured Valdir. It's still in his deck, but not going to come to his hand as it does not win the joust.
That looked very much like a Fiery War Axe to me. It was a Fiery War Axe. INER throws out the greetings. That War Axe is a huge deal. May have had to have gone ahead and slammed that greeting to get it off the board if he didn't pick it up. And now the decision to go coin 3-2 into 3-2 is looking a bit rough, but he does have the backup plan now of the double Fiery Bat, which plays around the War Axe to an extent.
And this is a rough situation for Thijs, because there are both 2 copies of Ravaging Ghoul and 2 copies of Whirlwind in INER's deck.
And 2 copies of Acolyte of Pain as well. Yeah.
Thijs does have the Freezing Trap as well as Deadly Shot in his hand, so the Acolyte is not quite as scary as one of those might be, but there is the possibility that INER can actually just get a Fiery Bat trigger to draw a card off this Acolyte right away. He chooses not to attack, however.
And Quick Shot being picked up is very, very relevant here. Deadly Shot, a very high-value card, so he wouldn't have necessarily wanted to throw it away here, but he is, in fact, going to use it just for curve reasons. This enables him to use a guaranteed combination of 2 of his 2-mana cards in hand on the following turn, even if one of those cards is Quick Shot.
Well, there's another Acolyte for INER here.
Well, let's try that again.
And I think that he may be considering the possibility, now that Thijs is going into a 4-mana turn, it's much more important that he actually clears these, because the threat of Houndmaster is absolutely huge. Right. And 1 Fiery Bat hits his face, Blood to Ichor on his own minion. He could have chosen to Blood to Ichor the Bat, which would get it off the board. But that would not give him a 2-2 because the Bat would die.
Yeah, there's also some sequencing questions there. Obviously, he could have Ichored his Acolyte first, at which point he would have picked up the Whirlwind. So that scenario makes what he did look a bit silly, but of course he was trying to maximize the chance of that Fiery Bat token. Fiery Bat Death Rattle hit the Acolyte of Pain, which is why he did that first.
And this opening, or rather this hand from Thijs, is a little bit awkward here. It's not really what he's looking for in this matchup. A lot of these small minions, a lot of these utility cards, they're good in particular situations, but against the mid-range Warrior deck, these are very vulnerable minions, like the fiery bats. He really needs the more substantial things, like Houndmaster, like Stranglethorn Tiger.
Right. Blood to Ica plus Ravaging Ghoul is a solid clear here. Ravaging Ghoul, one of the best tempo cards in this Tempo Warrior deck, Kibler, is able to clear out very, very small minions, wide boards very easily, reverse the state of the board, which is exactly what you're looking to do in these mid-game turns. And it's a very, very strong time for him to create this reversal on the board, because he now has a follow-up of Can, which is a powerful card, but a relatively slow one initially. So you want to be able to consolidate it on a board where you're already comfortable, not one where you're fighting from behind.
Yeah, and Ty's picking up a second bow, really not what he's looking for here. He has that freezing trap could be good, but is not good at the moment because of the 2-1 in play.
Yep.
He can use his bow to kill the 2-1 and then drop the second bow or that grub alongside the freezing trap, which does threaten to deal with Karen. It's problematic, though, against a warrior deck that includes Krorkron Elite, because you can really never be sure that you'll be able to guarantee the freeze effect on Karen there.
Yeah, so he is going to go for that play, develops the carrying grub, locks out the Ken with the freezing trap, and now suddenly INER's hand does not have a great deal to do in terms of proactivity. Fierce Monkey is nice. He can also now turn that into a 3-card Battle Rage if he would like to. Looks like he's going to go ahead and start by slamming the carrying grub. Picks up Ragnaros Firelord. So he has now reduced his Battle Rage capabilities just a little bit. Not enough mana remaining for the Monkey, the Battle Rage, and the Whirlwind. So probably just going to go ahead and drop the Monkey here, armor up, and he's going to hold on to that Battle Rage for a following turn.
Yeah, this is definitely a rough spot for Tice. You know, he has a very marginal life advantage, but he is super far behind in resources. INER has 5 cards in hand, like you mentioned, that Battle Rage as well. Yeah, it looks like he's just going to go ahead and I think just kill this. No, he's actually not going to kill it. He's just going to go ahead and slam it again, dig a little bit deeper through his deck. Well, speaking of kill, there's Kill Command. Tice picks up the spell that can give him a way to take down that monkey, but still not a great situation for the Dutch player.
Yeah, I mean, INER's play on that following turn, I'm just trying to work out his thinking. I mean, first thing to make clear is that secret that's in play from Tice is not a secret. There's only one secret in the deck, and it is Freezing Trap, and since the lists are revealed to all the players, he knows that that is exactly Freezing Trap. So there's no way that he's going to want to attack with this can when he can potentially get something else frozen instead. But it seemed like the potential 3-card Battle Rage turn was an extremely powerful line there, but he chose to just...
turn instead.
Yeah, he's going for it this turn instead, which also makes sense as to why he left that carrying grub at 1 health on the following turn, which looked a little bit strange. But the Battle Rage pickup now does get activated. INER made a little bit of a wince because, okay, now it makes sense. He was reacting to the double Armor Smith Whirlwind pickup, and that, Brian Kibler, is the worst draw in Tice's deck by a mile.
Not only is that an incredibly low impact card at a juncture where he needs something powerful, it also makes other cards in his deck worse because it's his last 1-drop for the Desert Camel.
Yeah.
So Tice in a really bad spot here, and INER, you know, as he has been doing all day, playing very quickly with a very powerful turn. Whirlwind here will gain him a bunch of armor, set up a 5-card Battle Rage. This game is all but over.
It certainly is. This was the big power turn from INER. You saw his reaction at the end of the previous turn as he got a good look at which cards he drew. Armor Smith, Whirlwind, he knew was pretty much guaranteed to lock that game out. And now it looks like he's even going to go ahead and just activate the freezing trap so he can start pushing through damage. He wants this game over and done with. We've seen he is a rapid, fast, impatient player. He wants to get this done. He wants the momentum to continue and try and ride this streak all the way to the European title.
Flame Juggler for Tice, that's not going to do it. There's really no coming back from the situation for Tice here. You know, he's going to play it out. We have seen Tice, not someone who generally will concede unless the game is over. Does give INER the possibility of making some sort of crucial mistake. But this is a game where it's hard for me to imagine INER even being able to find a line of play that could lose. He's just in such a dominating position.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem that we could just fairly comfortably play cards at random and still win the game from this position. Varian being picked up is just another huge late game bomb, but INER actually, for once, is in such a good position that it's taking him some time to work out exactly what the best line of play is.
I mean, this is the sort of situation. A lot of players, when they get to a game state where they're in such a huge lead,
Yep.
They will kind of get overconfident. In some cases, make mistakes that could lead to them losing from what is otherwise pretty much an unlosable position. And it's important, even if you do have a big lead, not to just squander that by just playing quickly because you're like, oh, well, whatever, you know, I'm just winning. Or maybe he also just wants to experience the joy of crushing Thijs for as long as possible on this stage.
I mean, that is very possible as well, but the play he's ended up with, I'm pretty happy with. Much whirlwind synergy is to be had. He picks up a ton of armor, makes a huge Frothing Berserker, enranges another Bloodhoof Brave. Thijs is in a huge mess right now. As you mentioned at the start, no Unleash the Hounds in his deck, which is one of the cards that could at least have some sort of impact on this board. So, unfortunately, Stranglethorn Tiger not going to do it. This is going to be the end of Game 3 for Thijs. INER now taking a lead, and I spoke to him very, very briefly in the post-game interview after the last game, and I asked him, you know, was the BlizzCon dream, was it ever something that was a reality to you? You know, was this just something that you were doing, gathering points, seeing if you could make it to prelims? Was this all a pipe dream for you, or were you really focused on BlizzCon? And he said, no, of course, I hadn't thought about it. I was just doing it to see how far I could get. Well, now INER, now suddenly it's a reality. You are very, very close.
Yeah, he's in the lead in the grand finals, and yeah, this is definitely a very strong position for him. He does still have that Freeze Mage and that Miracle Rogue, and those are decks that have the potential to struggle against what Thijs has remaining in his lineup. There's the Miracle for Thijs as well. That, I think, is probably the weakest deck remaining for Thijs, because it is, at best, a even matchup against the opposing Miracle deck, and it tends to be unfavored against Freeze Mage.
Absolutely, yeah. But having said that, yes, I agree that, you know, these decks that INER has left are the decks that are bad in the matchup concerns. They are, you know, decks that he likes, decks that he's the most accomplished with. He is primarily known as a Freeze Mage player, put in a ton of Freeze Mage practice with, you know, arguably the best Freeze Mage player in the world, Laughing, as well as Dr. Hippie, who we saw in the previous season's Europe finals, who is established as one of the best Freeze Mage players in Europe himself. So he is one of the elite. He is Freeze Mage.
I was going to say, he's not a Freeze Mage player. He is a Freeze Mage, as he said himself in his interview earlier.
So yeah,
I'm not a Freeze Mage. Not at all.
Wow, really? I never knew this about you. I thought Freeze Mage was your favorite deck, and you spent all of your evenings just happily firing Frostbolts and Ice Lances at your opponent's face.
All right, well, it will be Thijs playing the aggro Shaman deck against the Freeze Mage.
Yes, indeed. The Freeze Mage deck and INER the Freeze Mage himself. He's playing against both of them. Finley Murgleton, Totem Golem, Thing from Below as the opening hand, so a promising looking start. There's always some debate about keeps of Sir Finley in this deck, because you are playing the Totem synergy cards in the form of Thing from Below. But when you already have another Totem in your hand straight away, and that's the reason you can afford to fit Finley in your deck, is you have Tuskar Totemic, Totem Golem, Flame Tongue Totem, etc. You can still discount your 5/5 even without that hero power. When you have that security, I think in this matchup particularly, looking for one of these aggressive type hero powers on turn 1 is definitely viable.
Yeah, and Thijs finds Steady Shot. He is taking his time before picking it, which I really can't imagine another pick in this particular matchup.
Yeah, I mean, we saw him in the previous series in the semi-final. He took exactly that Mage over Hunter in a matchup against, It
was N'Zoth Paladin, I believe?
Against N'Zoth Paladin. Yeah, I mean, which was a very, very interesting decision, and one that me and TJ were talking about backstage. But still, Frostbolt is going to come right down now to deal with the 1/3. There is going to be almost certainly a Totem Golem follow-up. That is going to be met with the Doomsayer, and suddenly the advantage will swing quite heavily towards the Freeze Mage here.
Yeah, Thijs does have an answer if he chooses to use it. He could... actually, no, he's overloaded. Never mind. I was thinking that he could play the Lava Burst, but here, thankfully, he does have that hero power, which does mean that he can have a productive turn regardless. He can Steady Shot the face, attack the face. Still does 5 damage, but will enter his next turn with an absolutely clear board, as INER is able to drop an Acolyte of Pain and get his card draw rolling.
Yeah, that is just about the dream Doomsayer for a Freeze Mage in that scenario. Wiping the board, denying the tempo, and then being able to develop an Acolyte behind it. But speaking of the dream, if there's one thing that Shaman dreams about in this matchup, it's playing a 4-mana 7/7.
Yeah, this is a very big threat that can easily chip away, not even chip away, chunk away, hack away.
Pound away.
Yeah, rip the life out of the Freeze Mage. That's what I like to do.
Yeah.
And we see the Flame Breathe Faceless. You know, INER is not going to have any way to stop it, at least immediately, and it will crack in for 7 damage. But INER does set up a board that allows him to not only threaten to get some damage in on potentially the 7/7, but also draw him a bunch of cards.
Yeah, so this is actually kind of a complex turn for Thijs here. I mean, the Twitch chat play here is 11 to face. That's the most damage you can do this turn.
No,
with
you can do
abusive
12.
Oh, you can do 12 with love, sure. Okay, so this is the alternate line where suddenly you're giving Acolyte value here, but you're protecting your 7/7 from these minions on the board. So this is the alternate consideration. He's not valuing the card draw from his opponent too much at this point, since the entire board is essentially Death Rattle, draw a card. So he knows card draw is going to happen. So he was just trying to protect his 7/7 from these minions on the board. That, you know, paired with those, you know, a Frostbolt Ping or a Fireball suddenly is able to take care of it really easily.
Yeah, and INER now, you know, he finds a Arcane Intellect, so he finds more card draw. He's going to go ahead and draw with his Novice Engineer first. It's an interesting choice. I wonder what he's looking for before drawing with that Loot Hoarder. He finds a Torch.
He does find a Torch, but I mean, Novice Engineer going to come down. I'm almost certain we're going to see the Ice Lance come out as well here. There's just no way he can tank another 7 right now, especially with no secrets in sight just yet. And still, the Overload is going to prevent Thijs from loading up the Doomhammer this turn, but still plenty of proactive stuff. Abusive Sergeant to send in extra damage. He has the constant threat of that Hunter hero power, and as soon as he is able to start firing away some of these spells, then he's going to be in really good shape.
Thijs really has to be afraid of Blizzard next turn.
Yeah.
INER is going into a 6-mana turn, and in particular, he also has the Blood Mage Thalnos in play, along with 3 minions. So a Blizzard, even if he did remove the Blood Mage, could threaten to actually wipe out pretty much his entire board.
Certainly could, but he is just going to go for the all-in play. I think this is right because he basically has him covered even in the world of Blizzard here. With the amount of damage he has in hand, it's not really a big deal if his board gets blizzarded. He can just switch to the all-out face plan, not worry about his board too much. We are going to find out, though, Kibler, because the blizzard has been drawn.
But from INER's perspective, he really is just worried about his life total.
Right.
You know, he can blizzard here, but if he blizzards here, he is passing the turn without having drawn any extra cards, and he's still pretty far away from potentially having Ice Blocker Bearer to keep himself alive.
I agree. So, you know, Arcane Intellect and Frost Nova is definitely a pairing that you could throw together here. INER is just considering his options, though. That Blizzard is attractive, and there is a tendency sometimes to, you know, get tilted towards the card that you draw in the immediate turn because you know, that natural excitement that you get of drawing another option. Looks like INER is going to go ahead and favor the Blizzard. And as you said, that leaves him still without a secret activated. Argent Horse Rider picked up is even more damage, but Thijs can just start rationing out all this damage now in the most efficient way that he possibly can to try and beat that 12 health. He hasn't seen a secret played yet. No information, of course, from Thijs' side as to whether there's one in hand or not.
He needs to just try and get the game over as fast as possible.
Right.
He wants to just get the Doomhammer to the face. He can use his hero power here to get another 2 damage, leaving INER at just 6 health. He has 8 points of burn in his hand. So barring the possibility of exactly Ice Block, the game is going to be Thijs' next turn.
Yeah, not to mention there is still that 7/4 on the board that needs being dealt with. He is able to deal with it just with his board, trading into it 1 by 1, but that Ice Barrier is a risky proposition. He doesn't know that there would be double spells in hand that could kill him without even, you know, having to activate the Ice Barrier here. So he might suspect that's good enough. Might also just be taking a risk. You know, he may expect to die here, but he might just be saying, okay, if I'm going to win this game, this is what I need to happen. Right. I need this barrier to stick.
Yeah, and this is a situation that, you know, you are leaving yourself. He could have used Arcane Intellect to dig,
right.
But if he Arcane Intellects and digs, what's he beating?
Yeah.
You know, he probably can't beat the burn spells that kill him anyway. if he just plays that and it's like, okay, well, he has to get another ice block the next turn because his opponent just has steady shot. So here he's just playing for the. Is Thijs going to attack?
So Amir puts
Does
him
he
up
still
to
have
14.
enough damage?
It puts him up to 14 life, so he has 8 from the lava burst. Yeah,
okay,
he
does.
Still powers
I
through with
briefly,
the hero
I briefly
power
was terrified.
Yeah.
But Thijs does end up just having the damage to close things out despite the ice barrier, and he will even up the series 2-2.
Yep, so Thijs squares things up again. You know, as you said, we're starting to get down to the decks now with INER that can start to be a little exposed, but I think that was one of the worst matchups remaining for the Freeze Mage for sure. That Shaman, you know, INER has the fastest build possible almost. He hasn't even slowed his deck down with the new list that a lot of players are going towards, the one Thijs is running with the Thing from Below and the Tuskar Totemic. So that deck was as fast as possible. Being able to just crush out the Freeze Mage, and from now on there is going to be a much more, or slightly more favorable matchups with the Freeze Mage at least.
Yeah, the Freeze Mage is in definitely in good shape against Thijs's Rogue deck.
Yep.
The sort of bigger question mark, I think, is the Hunter deck. Historically, Hunter has been pretty good against Freeze Mage.
Right.
This is a bit slower of a Hunter deck than we've in many cases seen in the past. Topping off at Call of the Wild, that is a bit slower than say. A lot of the previous iterations. Also doesn't have a lot of the Death Rattle minions that in pre-standard, things like Piloted Shredder that could make the board clears less valuable.
Right, I was discussing this matchup in some detail with the players who are here, and I know Thijs thinks it's immensely favored for the Hunter, George C thinks it's favored for the Freeze Mage, Crane thinks it's slightly favored for the Hunter, so you know, the jury is still out, is the verdict on this.
And one thing that's important is we've actually seen so many different versions of Hunter. That's the class that has seen the greatest diversity in terms of the choices and the specific builds in this event. And Thijs, I think, has one of the better builds against Freeze Mage. He has no copies of Unleash the Hounds.
Yep.
He has not the Carrion Grub, the Desert Camel.
Yes.
The other 3-drop. So that, I think, gives him a lot more power in this matchup and a lot less potential dead draws that some of the other builds might suffer from.
Right, and he also has the High Main as well, which isn't an auto-inclusion. You know, some people are leaving the High Main out of their deck because of some of the targeted removal like Sap and Hex that you commonly come up against in tournaments, but High Main is one of the power cards against Freeze Mage for sure, because it's so difficult for them to deal with efficiently on the board. So completely agree with you. Thijs does have a very powerful build of the Hunter available to him, but you, I think, in the pre-finals analysis segment pointed out that maybe the Rogue might be a difficult point for Thijs, and that is the other deck that he has remaining here.
Yeah, I think that is going to be the deck that, I mean, as we were saying, that is definitely a good matchup for the Freeze Mage. The Freeze Mage wants to queue into the Rogue.
For sure.
You definitely get a win there. And then it could just come down to Rogue versus Rogue.
It certainly could, and that is a matchup that we saw in the semi-final as well, that INER was able to win in explosive fashion. We saw that, that clenched fist when he got that cold blood and knew that he had the damage to force through. I was actually talking to Casey about that as well, and he did in fact pick up on that signal. Like, he knew that he was dead, so he was considering options as crazy as, shadow striking his own blood mage Thanos to try and pick up that healing that he needed to get out of it. So, maybe INER needs to just hold back on some of the information that he's revealing to his opponent here, but again, it kind of comes back to that inexperience and unfamiliarity that he's talked about with this kind of live studio Hearthstone environment.
I mean, and Thijs is someone, he's been here before. Right. He has been exactly here before, in fact.
Yeah.
The grand finals of European Championship.
Yep.
And that is, that sort of poise and not necessarily letting your excitement get the better of you when you're in a situation where that communication of that excitement could possibly give your opponent information that they could use to influence their decisions.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that only comes with time. This isn't something, a lot of the best players in Hearthstone are very studious people. They sit at home and they use their time, time management skills effectively to gather information on the meta, gather information on deck lists, running spreadsheets, all these mathematical equations, working things out. Experience in a live tournament environment and how to handle yourselves, how to overcome the nerves. That's not something that you can learn through any other means than just being here and doing it over and over again. All
right, well, here we are, and it is time to see who wins between Thijs's Hunter deck and INER with that Rogue.
Yes, indeed. This is a matchup that is often dictated by key usage of the card Sap, but I think people oversimplify the matchup in that sense and just say, okay, it's favored for the Rogue because they can Sap high mains. Well, things aren't quite that simple. Sometimes the Hunter can have an aggressive enough start that, you know, you have to sap an early Helm Mastered target or you're going to end up taking too much damage, and then the Hunter is able to come through. So it is a little bit more complex, but an early backstab and an early Tomb Pillager here from INER makes this look like a very promising opening hand for him.
Yeah, and you know, one card that's fairly key in this matchup we see in Thijs' hand, or at least we did before he mulliganed. We'll see if it's still there. The Deadly Shot. Deadly Shot is a card that is able to answer even a concealed Auctioneer. INER's version of Rogue actually only plays a single copy of Conceal,
right.
But the combination of the pressure that the Hunter can put on, in particular with Desert Camel, which creates multiple bodies that can be more difficult for the sort of tempo-based removal of the Rogue to deal with, along with actually having answers to Gadgets and Auctioneer, not giving your opponent time, can really give the Hunter a window to take down the game.
Yeah, and here you can see Backstab, a huge card against Hunter. Most of their early game minions are extremely vulnerable to the Backstab. He's able to develop the weapon now for tempo, which means if the Desert Camel comes down and pulls a Fiery Bat, he's able to take care of it with the dagger and coin out the Tomb Pillager to contest the 2-4 effectively. Now has double Tomb Pillager as well.
Yeah, that Tomb Pillager is a huge card in this matchup for the Rogue. It actually gives them a sizable body that can not only contest the mid-range minions of the Hunter deck, but also threatens to actually close out the game, so they don't necessarily have to play the slow, grindy Gadgets and Auctioneer style of play.
Right, and now the consideration for Thijs here has to be how he allocates his resources here. He's going to go with the Freezing Trap. He did see INER coin out the Tomb Pillager here, so he's expecting something along the lines of second Tomb Pillager, maybe an Azure Drake somewhere in the near future, because if this Pillager were to die, you know, INER could of course coin out a Drake on this turn using the coin that he got, so he's going to choose not to Deadly Shot it. Keep that in mind, as you said, for the Gadgetzan Auctioneer being concealed or for higher value threats. Freezing Trap and the Hero Power locks it out quite effectively.
INER with a potentially tough turn here. He does have that second Tomb Pillager, will get the first one bounced, and does decide to just play the second one, giving him, again, a fairly large minion that can help contest what Thijs is able to muster. A second Deadly Shot for Thijs, though, will potentially allow him to just continue the pressure.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a very interesting decision, because Deadly Shot means no more development here, and he does have two good development options on his part, but that 5-4 on the board threatens to trade so effectively. I mean, what does Desert Camel get you? At best, it gets you 2 more 2-4s, any of which are a nice trade for the Tomb Pillager. What does Animal Companion get you? Well, some of the time it gets you a 2-4, which is a really good trade for the Tomb Pillager. So now that the second Deadly Shot has been drawn, it seems to make sense to me. He does still have the initiative. He's plugging away for 4 damage a turn since he keeps hero powering so often. So the Rogue is still under pressure, even though Thijs is missing on some of his development a little bit.
Yeah, he's gotten INER down to just 18 life. He doesn't have access to any real burst in his hand. There's no kill commands. There's no quick shots. And he does have that high main, which, as we mentioned, so great in so many other matchups. But in this one, often a card you just don't want to ever actually spend your mana on.
Right. And Shiv is going to come down, followed by the SI7 agent, and that dagger that was able to be developed on turn 2 has just meant so much for INER here, and that comes from the power of the 0 mana backstab, able to remove the first minion that Thijs played and develop the mana into the dagger there, and that's been able to answer half of the Desert Camel and now the second half of the Desert Camel on the following turn, so that dagger is pretty much primarily responsible for him being a 3-3 ahead of the game right now.
And there's Huffer off the Animal Companion. This is definitely a difficult situation for the Hunter player, because once the Rogue starts developing minions, they can start to really contest the board, and the Hunter player really needs to just keep the pressure on, keep attacking.
Yep.
Because their goal, obviously, is to reduce the opponent's life to 0. But the Rogue is able to do that in much, surprisingly, in much larger bursts, thanks to Leroy and Cold Blood and things like that, whereas the Hunter has the more consistent damage over time because of the steady shot hero power.
Absolutely. Does get the Valdir this time, does Thijs, off the Desert Camel, so he is in pretty good shape now. This is a very awkward board for Rogue to deal with. Even with such a large hand, they need very, very specific combinations of cards to be able to deal with this effectively. He's going to go for the Violet Teacher, the Eviscerate. He has the trade on the board into the Huffer if he would like it, which I'm sure he will take as he's under so much pressure. So now just isolating that 2-4 on the board Double high mains now from Thijs. As you said, not a card that you really want to invest the mana into in this matchup, which means his hand is looking sparse on options. At what point do you get to, Kibler, where you say, okay, now I just have to play one of these high mains now, or I'm just going to relinquish the pressure anyway?
I mean, when you, in part when you have nothing else to do.
Right.
I mean, Thijs is definitely in a very rough spot because, you know, INER has now this Violet Teacher in play, which threatens to make the deadly shot in his hand completely useless, essentially. And now Thijs has to figure out, okay, am I going to attack the face? Am I going to just give up on my deadly shot here? And I think that's the plan he's taking. He's just going to go ahead and try to close out this game as quickly as possible, hope that INER can't punish him for leaving this Violet Teacher on the board. And I think, in particular, with the high mains in his hand, this is kind of a just hope situation because he has so few resources that are really valuable at this stage, and the game is getting long, which really favors the rogue.
Yeah, and there's also the consideration that just the more heavily you pressure the rogue player, the more damage you push, the more desperate they get, the more likely they are to just sap one of your minions because they have no better removal option. Then suddenly your high mains become good cards again. But the Gadgetzan Auctioneer is going to come out here. The Eviscerate can help him clear out the board entirely, which means no additional damage in hand right now for Thijs. And even if the high main does come down, INER is still preserving that sap, but he might be just considering the option of holding on to that damage and using the sap, because let's be clear here, INER needs to find a way to race very, very soon. Otherwise, he's just going to lose to the Hunter Hero power.
Yeah, INER has just a single copy of Earthen Ring Farseer in his deck. There's Kill Command, but Thijs has no beasts. He can use his hero power here, play out a high main, puts INER to just 5. If INER is not able to close out the game the next turn or heal himself, Thijs will have the win with that Kill Command in the following turn.
Yep.
But that's a big if. There's already a Auctioneer in play. He could also just not play the Savannah high main
and use Deadly Shot instead.
He could use the Deadly Shot, which will reduce the possibility that INER will be able to kill him on his turn. It gets a 1-1, but this also, not only that, but it also strands sap in his opponent's hand.
Yes.
Which means that that's one fewer cheap spell he can possibly play.
Yep. And there is no activator in hand right now for Cold Blood, which is the only spell that INER's holding onto right now that is castable. So if he does have to lead off his turn with that, it does mean it's going to be an inefficient use of Cold Blood. But Thijs is considering his options, seeing if there's any particular reason why he would want to kill Command now. It's like he is going to go ahead and do it. So he has turned his strategy face up. INER knows exactly what the deal is. He is dead. He needs to either kill his opponent or find his Earthen Ring Farseer here to get himself out of this game.
Yeah, and he finds a Zeril, which can represent another shot at a card. Cold Blood will pick him up 1. There's Leroy.
Okay, so now we're talking in terms of damage. He has 11, no, he had 10 on board already. That 1-1 cannot attack. That's 16 with the Leroy. So he is way too far off for lethal to be a realistic possibility.
And it's interesting, crucially, the fact that Thijs chose not to play a high man has stranded that sap in INER's hand. If INER's next card is Earthen Ring Farseer, if Thijs had played that high man, he'd lose the game.
Right, and there's also just the consideration that the Deadly Shot at the very, very least took 1 damage off the board, which is probably more relevant than that high main was ever going to be. It was just going to be Earthen Ring Farseer or bust for his opponent. He knew that. So, yeah, second Cold Blood is going to come down. INER is going to continue to cycle, but he is on a drawing to nothing right now. This game is over, and despite that conceal at the end...
You can't conceal face.
Looking like the dream draw, face is still visible, even if it wasn't.
Oh, there it is. The last card.
So
Zadavada, just there to tease him. And Thijs will take Game 5 and lead the series 3-2.
Yeah, you go. Even if you could conceal face, the Hunter Hero power always knows where to go.
True.
You just press the button and it does the job for you.
It remains the place, stealthed or not.
Yeah, so Thijs is looking in very, very good shape here. He is going to go to the hill. Just one more game to pick up to become the repeat European champion, which would be a phenomenal feat. But I believe TJ is standing by with some of our players to see what they are having to think about this grand final.
The action's starting to heat up. Thijs just 1 win away from winning the grand final and making himself a Europe champion once again. I'm sitting here with Crane and George to talk about what these players got to do to find a win. So, George, I'm going to come to you first. Thijs just has 1 win left to make it and be the spring champion. Can he do it? What is he going to have to do to win this match?
He's got to win with Rogue against his Rogue and his Freeze Mage. So he has like 2 chances. And the mirror's pretty volatile. Freeze Mage is kind of bad, but he has 2 chances. It was super important because if he lost with his Hunter, it would be pretty difficult then because he has to win Rogue against Freeze Mage on its own. And in a vacuum, Freeze Mage would win every time. So I think it was super important that game, and Thijs is probably favoured to take it now.
Graham, what are your thoughts? Do you agree Thijs is favored to take this, or do you think INER has the decks to bring it back?
I mean, if you look at the matchups, I think it's fairly close because it's all gonna come down to the Rogue Mirror, in my opinion. Like INER's Freeze Mage, he's so good at it, and if you know how to play it, you almost always beat the Rogue with Freeze Mage. So the Mirror is gonna be key, and I think he has a really good shot at making it. I mean, it's just gonna come down to good decision making.
All right, well, good decision-making it is. We've heard it from George. He thinks Thijs is going to take it. We've heard it from Craig. He thinks it's going to come down to the Rogue Mirror, but we're going to send it back to the desk to get into the action and see the finale.
Thank you, TJ, George, and Crane. Interesting thoughts, both from George and Crane there. Obviously, we made the point as well that the Rogue Mirror could end up being crucial here because the Freeze Mage Rogue game is fairly one-sided. You know, Miracle Rogue is a very highly tuned combo deck that has all the tools it needs to kill an opponent once. It's not very well equipped to be able to deal with killing an opponent upwards of 3 times sometimes when Ice Blocks comes into play, as well as chewing through ice barriers, etc. So the Freeze Mage can definitely be extremely effective in that matchup. But if we do see an eventual Rogue Mirror, is there anything in either of these lineups looking at them that gives one deck or the other the edge? One thing that is worth noting is that, as you mentioned earlier, INER only has a single copy of Conceal, and we have seen a number of Rogue matchups in this event and throughout the preliminaries come down to just a Conceal turn rather than Auctioneer turn, just setting up a burst of damage over 2 turns thanks to Conceal. So that could give the edge to Thijs. Yeah, that is in the future. Right now, Thijs is going to have to try and win the difficult matchup first if he doesn't want this game to go all the way. He's 3-2 up right now. If he can get the unlikely win with the Miracle Rogue against the Freeze Mage, he will be the first repeat European champion. He's got a long way to go. As we mentioned, Freeze Mage heavily favored in this matchup. It is called Miracle Rogue, though. It is. Anything could happen. It is. And the fact that someone in Hearthstone or in a card game in general could be a repeat European champion is something of a miracle in itself. Of course, Brian, you have a lot of experience with playing huge card game tournaments in a bunch of different disciplines. Like, what would it mean for someone? Like, what level of dominance does it show for someone to win such a huge tournament back-to-back on 2 consecutive years? I mean, it's particularly impressive, as you mentioned, because it's done, you know, if he does win, that it will have happened so close together, because one of the most important things is demonstrating yourself as a top player in games that do have, in card games that do have elements of chance in them. You need to demonstrate that you can perform consistently. Obviously, players preparing and bringing great decks to an individual event will often lead to them being able to be successful in that event, but it's still very important, and perhaps more important, to demonstrate that you're able to have that kind of success multiple times. And for Thijs to have been so successful over not only last year, but into this year as well, is incredibly impressive. There we go. And let's not just quite get too far ahead of ourselves here. Thijs does still have a way to go, and even right now he's having a very tough decision as to what he wants to do with his coin here. Obviously the coin is just a very valuable card in itself in this matchup, and after Thijs's 60-second turn or so, we see a 1-second response from INER, who snap fireballs that Violet Teacher before he gets too far out of control. And that leaves Thijs with a fairly dead turn of his own. He's just going to try and cycle out his Blood Mage Thanos, attack face, re-dagger. So the pressure has been relieved by that fireball from INER, and you can see straight away how much more comfortable INER is with this deck than he is with any other. Just straight away, he knows every play that he wants to make, and this isn't an indication of him not thinking about the plays. It means he's incredibly comfortable, and he's so comfortable with the expected outcomes of the deck that he can consider options during his opponent's turn, and then when it comes back to him, he knows what his reaction is straight away. One thing that's very important in Hearthstone in general, and in particular with a deck like Freeze Mage in Hearthstone, with the it's emoting. Emoting is incredibly important. Yes, it is. Yeah. But beyond emoting, is just understanding the dynamic of a matchup. Not necessarily figuring out everything from sort of first principles as you go, but recognizing this is what's important at various stages. This is what I'm looking to do in the early game, the mid game, and the late game. And in particular with Freeze Mage,
it's like, okay, well, what are the combinations of cards that represent me being able to win from these variety of situations? And INER clearly understands that very, very well.
Yeah. In the meantime, Thijs has decided to go off very early in this match. Gadgetzan coming down, backstab and a preparation being used with the Fan of Knives, and the spell damage means that the Emperor is taken care of, and he's making a pretty strong push early on in proceedings here. No Flame Strike in hand from INER to be able to deal with this Gadgetzan right off the bat. It does have the Blood Mage, which can help some of his spells deal with this board very effectively.
He also just has a pretty significant amount of damage. He is going to use a lot of it to clear the board, but has Alexstrasza also waiting in the wings. And worth noting that Thijs' deck has only that single Earthen Ring Farseer to possibly heal himself back up.
Yeah, the single Earthen Ring is becoming pretty much standard these days. Both INER and Thijs are favoring that list, or that configuration in their lists. So not too much healing to mitigate the potential damage of the Freeze Mage here. The Rogue, if they're going to get the job done, does have to play as the aggressor, hope that the Freeze Mage misses some of their important answers and they're able to push enough damage through. But push after push here from Thijs is being denied by INER. We saw the early Violet Teacher meet the Fireball. We saw that big Miracle Turn get answered with the double Forgotten Torch. Now just a lowly 3-3 on the board, threatening damage.
And INER just continuing to draw cards here. Novice Engineer picking himself up an Ice Block, or rather a Frostbolt in addition to that Ice Block he had. Just using a Frost Nova to prevent a little bit of damage here, just looking to buy himself some time.
Yeah, does use that time to develop the Ice Block as well, so he is now protected to the damage from hand, and that's relevant because we see Thijs has already built up all of his burst in hand. The Leroy Jenkins double Cold Blood combo is sat in hand already, so if Eviscerate started to get added to that, he would be under threat of dying very quickly.
It's worth noting that INER has quite a bit of damage in his own hand.
Yep.
He has double Frostbolt, Ice Lance, and Fireball. That, I believe, adds up to... well, a lot.
Right, so this goes some way to explain the Frost Nova on the previous turn, because basically if INER can keep that Ice Block up for this turn, he essentially has auto in proceedings from there, because if that Ice Block is protected, he can Alexstrasza on the following turn, and then he has all the burn to back it up. So that Frost Nova may look like a waste on just a 3-3, but it's just about maximizing his chances of protecting 23 life from getting popped right now. If that can happen, nothing else matters for INER.
Yeah, and Thijs here, trying to figure out if there's any way he can really deal with this this particular board. Going to go ahead and dig a little bit with the Azure Drake, and looks to be thinking about preparation.
Yeah, he might just be looking to prep out a spell and make a huge Van Cleef here, as he's going to prep the Conceal first, hide his board. Van Cleef is going to come down as a huge threat, but as I elaborated on the previous turn, this is a formality. Rogue has no way to interact with an Ice Block here, which means that Alexstrasza is going to come down. The Earthen Ring Farseer is in hand, but Ice Lances and Frostbolts just keep getting drawn. And that single copy of Earthen Ring Farseer is not going to be enough to get the job done here.
If it weren't for that that Ice Lance picked up, Thijs might have been able to get himself out of range to die the immediate following turn. But INER has just enough, or more than enough damage to close things out, despite even if Thijs breaks the Ice Block here, even if Thijs heals himself, INER has all the tools he needs.
Yep, so Thijs is just going to go through the motions here. He'll be strongly suspecting that he dies, but there'll be an inkling in the back of his mind that maybe the follow-up here is Pyroblast, in which case I've just pulled myself out of range, but he's going to get the sad news very, very quickly that the combination in hand from INER is Fireball, Frostbolt, and Ice Lance. And as he goes through the motions here, we can see with our perfect 2020 caster vision that the game is over, and this Grand Finals in fitting form is going to go all the way down to a Game 7.
Yeah, Thijs is going to go ahead and break the Ice Block and even conceal his remaining board if he chooses, but doesn't end up mattering whatsoever. INER has everything he needs in his hand to burn Thijs into a crisp.
Yep, and leads out with the Doomsayer just for the fun of it. Second Doomsayer joins the party. They want to watch the firework display, and here we go. Fireball, Frostbolt, and Ice Lance comes up.
The end is, in fact, coming.
There we go. INER, after, this just being purely a dream to him just a few months ago, is now one game, one victory, one mirror match away from picking up a ticket to BlizzCon and the title of European champion.
Yeah, we look at his face. You know, he has played very quickly, very decisively throughout this. But I think it's really setting in that he is about to play one game of the Rogue Mirror match to determine who will be the Europe Spring Champion and will be moving on to BlizzCon later this year.
Indeed, he's just taking a moment, just compose himself, quick sip of water, but he's come a long way just purely in this tournament. It has to be said, he did look a little bit uncomfortable in the first day. He's come out of his shell a little bit. He looks much more accomplished at the desk now, and Thijs is the one that's looking a little bit pensive about proceedings, if anything, right now.
I mean, Thijs, he's a player who has a lot of success, a lot of experience on this kind of stage. But even if you've been there before, you know, this is the final game to determine who will be the champion, and that's stressful for anyone. You know, I've been in this kind of situation, and you know, definitely the nerves are there, no matter how many tournaments you may have won in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. But this again, for INER for sure is the most important game of his Hearthstone career, and we've talked about the Rogue Mirror. That double conceal build for Thijs does possibly give him the slight edge. I believe there's only one Shadow Strike in both lists as well, which can have a big impact. Shadow Strike, a very, very clean removal card in the mid game for the Pillagers, the Azure Drakes, the Gadgetzan Auctioneers. So Thijs has drawn the early Edwin here as well, which can be another way if there's no sap. Generally, sap is just not a card that you keep. So if the early Edwin can come down as a huge 6/6, 8/8 or beyond, then that can be potentially crushing in the matchup. But suddenly the psychological side comes into effect. You know, do you want to bet your tournament life, bet the European title on going all in on an Edwin?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tough situation. Thijs, both players really taking their time with their mulligan decision here. I imagine in part they don't want to give away any information to their opponent before they make their own mulligan decisions.
Right.
That's one thing that some players don't really pay much attention to, but your opponent sees the number of cards that you mulligan as it happens. So if you immediately make your mulligan decision and your opponent has the opportunity, okay, well, you kept 3 cards, so I know you're very likely to have a good hand. Speaking of good hands, neither player with a particularly exciting one. INER does have the more proactive hand, barring that Edwin Van Cleef, though.
Right, I mean, what I will say is that INER actually mulliganed very quickly there. He kept his hand.
Oh.
He just kept SI prep Gadgetzan Auctioneer. He just felt that was good enough. And honestly, I mean, it's not bad. I mean, generally, the way I like to mulligan in this matchup is that I want threats, and I want, like, one tempo card. I want a Deadly Poison or a Backstab or an Eviscerate alongside threats. So, you know, SI Agent, Gadgetzan Auctioneer, and a prep kind of, you know, fulfills that requirement for me. And he's picked up a very, very powerful curve. Picks up the Tomb Pillager and the Drake to go along with the Auctioneer and the prep. So he's the one that's going to curve out as the aggressor here, but Thijs has the opportunity to swing proceedings back the other way right now with a Edwin Van Cleef.
Yeah, Deadly Poison allows him to remove the SI7 agent from his opponent's board and coin 6/6 Van Cleef. Suddenly, INER is under a lot of pressure.
Certainly is. He does have the consistent curve on his side, and with that preparation in hand, he does have the potential to make a huge Edwin of his own on a following turn, but Backstab is picked up, which can allow him now to answer this Tomb Pillager. He did have the sap already that could just go ahead and get rid of it if he wanted to ride this Edwin to victory, but Blood Mage Backstab is possible as well. It does already have the Deadly Poison Dagger, though, so it doesn't need the spell damage from the Blood Mage. Yeah,
this is got to be a pretty difficult spot, an interesting spot for Thijs. He does have, as you mentioned, that sap, and as you said, sap is not really a card that has tons of application in this particular matchup, and I think that getting your opponent's 4-drop with it is about as good as it's going to get. And he's just going to go ahead and cold blood Edwin Van Cleef. So Thijs wants to get this over as quickly as possible. 10 damage to INER's face.
And this, I spoke about this in the opening, you know, there would be a tendency for a lot of players in this situation to play safe in this scenario. You know, Thijs is not that guy. He's going to make what he thinks is the best play in any situation. He's going to ignore the exact status of the game. Doesn't matter if this is him in his bedroom or him playing for the European title. If he thinks Sap Cold Blood is the play, then Sap Cold Blood is the play.
And INER does not find a Sap of his own. We mentioned that INER snap kept his hand, all 3 cards. We also said Sap is not a card that you generally want early in this matchup. Right. So Thijs able to piece through that information and read that INER probably doesn't have a sap. I can just go in on this Edwin and end the game as quickly as possible.
And he has 15 damage right now. He has that second deadly poison that he can add to the first
And
one. Picks
Eviscerate
up
as
an
well.
Eviscerate. Doesn't have the mana this turn, but if there are not dramatic answers picked up for INER in the near future, Thijs is going to close out this Rogue Mirror in unexpectedly quick fashion. INER needs something serious very, very soon. He has Auctioneer and a Preparation in his hand, so miracles are possible here. The clue is in the name of the deck, but he's going to have to find something.
And Thijs, despite this huge edge he has right now, taking his time. He doesn't want to miss anything. He's going to go ahead and attack the face right away, getting INER down to just 7 life. And INER will pick up Violet Teacher. That is not going to help. He has, as you mentioned, that Auctioneer. He can prep, he can find Sap, but that's not going to be enough.
It's really not. Gadgetzan Preparation, Fan of Knives is his best looking play right now. That would allow a trade into the 10-6, but the Azure Drake would still remain on the board. Even if a Backstab was picked up, it couldn't do the 2 damage because the Drake was already damaged, but he sees no better option here. Shiv is picked up. That's not going to do anything better than Fan of Knives in this scenario. So unless Backstab is picked up here. Okay, so actually the Shiv first was sensible because it meant he could have picked up Backstab into Fan of Knives.
But it's too late.
But there's nothing there.
Thijs is the Europe Spring Champion. He'll be going back to BlizzCon back-to-back years.
Wow, and that cry that came out from Thijs was audible over here through my headset. He is a delighted young man right now. A repeat European champion. A valiant effort from INER, just falling at the last hurdle, but no shame. Thijs continuing his dominance as just one of the most dominant Hearthstone players we have seen in our game's short lifespan.
And look at the champion, just overwhelmed with emotion. He is, a player who is so passionate about this game, and clearly this means a lot to him.